If you hear like wind or little woo, it's really windy outside and I can't do anything about that. So, what is up, party people? Welcome back to my channel. I'm Jamila. This is Jamila Be Readin', because I do be reading. Alright, so today we're going to be doing my November wrap up. I actually already did kind of a wrap up already this month for all of the books that I read for Indigathon. So I'll have that linked up above and down below in the description if you want to check out all of the books that I read for Indigathon. I actually didn't read that much outside of the books that I read for Indigathon, but I thought I would just tack in my December TBR at the end of this video just because I don't have a lot of books planned for December. I'm entering finals next week. I'm stressed. I don't really know what or how many books I'm going to be reading. I have a couple of things that I want to prioritize, but other than that, it's kind of all up in the air. So I figured I didn't really need to make a whole separate TBR video for that. At the top of the month, I read Catherine House. This is something that I started at the end of October and carried on into November. This is an new adult book that follows our main character, Inez, who gets accepted into this very prestigious and mysterious university-like institution called Catherine House. It is in rural Pennsylvania. People know about it, but don't really know what goes on at this school. Mostly what people know is that it has spawned many a greats, Supreme Court justices, famous actors, artists, intellectuals, etc. Inez gets accepted into this house, or gets accepted into this school. You get free tuition, boarding, everything, but the trade-off is that it is year-round for 3 years. You're there and you do not interact with or talk with people outside of Catherine House. Your whole focus is Catherine House, Catherine House, Catherine House. So Inez gets accepted. She's pretty much running away from something bad that happened in her past. So she really doesn't have anywhere else to go. So she goes to the school. She is very apathetic, probably due to the trauma that she's experienced in her past. And so her narration, because she's the POV character, is very dreamlike. It's very a little bit uncaring. She's just kind of going through the motions, moving along. This book also takes place over the span of the 3 years that she's at Catherine House. And so this has been a very controversial book, it seems like. I think it's sitting at like a 3.1 stars on Goodreads. And I can see why. I think a lot of the problems that people have are the narration and Inez herself. Because of the apathetic tone in which the story is told, it can be hard to feel invested in what's going on. On top of that, there really is no plot. There is something that kind of happens at the end of her first year that is somewhat carrying the plot, but really it's more of a character study. It's more of a look at how people in certain conditions can succumb to, I guess, cults or just like mind hive behavior. I don't know what I'm saying, but because of that, the lack of plot and the way it's narrated, I think that's what's given a lot of people pause. I personally liked it. I was unsure. I kind of just didn't have any expectations going into it because of everything that I've been hearing, but I gave it 4 stars. I think it was very fascinating to read, honestly. But if you don't like books that don't really have a plot, or anyone who's invested in their own story, then that might bother you. But I thought it was really a fascinating read. And that's pretty much all I can say about it without giving too much away. But yeah, 4 stars. I enjoyed it. That was a little bit rambly, but it is what it is. All right, so then I read the second volume of Tokyo Ghoul. I don't really have a lot to say about it because it's second volume. If you didn't already know what Tokyo Ghoul was about, it's set in like our world, but there are ghouls, these monsters called ghouls that exist. People know about them. There's like a whole agency dedicated to fighting ghouls, policing ghouls. Their diet is humans, so you can see where that conflict lies. And the story follows our protagonist, Ken Kaneki, who is a first-year university student. He encounters a ghoul that's trying to kill him, and by some freak accident, the ghoul gets killed, and he ends up having to go under surgery, and the doctor doesn't know that the ghoul that was attacking him was a ghoul, so he transfers some of her organs into him because he needed a transplant, and so he becomes like the first half human, half ghoul person, and he's trying to navigate the politics of ghouls and humans. What does it mean to be human? It takes a very kind of like philosophical tone sometimes, and so this is just the second volume. It's continuing on with that. I don't really have much to say. It was the second volume. Stuff happened. It was interesting. I will say that Ken Kaneki he's grating on my nerves a little bit, but you know what? We'll just have to wait and see. But I guess I'll give it 4 stars. I don't really have a lot of thoughts on it right now. Next, I read this book called The Frame Up. This follows a comic book artist, comic book writer named M.G. Martin. She is a geek girl in geek culture. And there is a series of vigilante justice being taken in Los Angeles where she lives. And it is mimicking a famous comic book from the comic place that she works at. So she inevitably teams up with a detective on the case to figure out the whole thing and yada yada. It's not great. I give it 1 star. And if you want to know more in-depth thoughts, I have like a whole 30-minute review that'll be linked up above or down below in the description, so you can go check that out. Then I was finding myself in a little bit of a reading slump, kind of getting towards the end of November, so I just picked up a random romance book that I happened to have on my Kindle, and I was like, let me just refresh. I need something chill, easy, cute to read. So I ended up reading A Girl Like Her by Talia Hibbert, famously known for the Brown Sisters books. This is the first book in the Ravenswood trilogy, I believe. And this follows our 2 protagonists, Ruth Kaba and Evan Miller. This takes place in a small town. Ruth is essentially the town's outcast. She has autism, but the reason that she is the outcast is because of a certain incident that happened in her past with one of the most prominent men in this town. I won't talk about what the incident is because obviously that's going to be a spoiler. So she's an outcast. She really keeps to herself. She writes a comic book, which I guess that's the theme for November, but she writes comic book or like a webtoons type of situation as her job, and she really just keeps to herself. She really likes comic books. She likes nerdy things, etc. And so enter Evan Miller. He becomes her new next door neighbor. He is also working for the prominent person who had that incident with Ruth. And he's like being warned about her, all this stuff. Sorry, this is kind of getting a little rambly, but they end up having a romance. He realizes that she doesn't really cook for herself or anything, so he starts cooking and bringing meals to her. And then they start bonding. She gives him some comic books as trade, and they just kind of chat about that and form a friendship that, as you can probably tell, inevitably turns into a romance. To be honest, there's not like a plot that's moving this forward per se, but that was fine. It was cute. Evan is a sweetheart. I love Ruth also. She has a nice character arc. He has a good character arc. It was cute, okay? It was cute. I give it 4 stars. Yeah, what else can I say besides it was cute? You know, it really brought me out of my reading slump. I would check it out, especially if you're a fan of Talia Hibbert's works, especially the Brown Sisters books. It was cute. I liked it. Definitely going to continue on with this romance trilogy. Okay, and the last thing that I read, which I just finished like 2 days ago, The Burning God by R.F. Kuang. Yeah, I'm still recovering emotionally from this book. This is the final book in the Poppy War series. If you didn't already know, the Poppy War series is a military epic fantasy that follows our protagonist Rin, who is from the poor southern countryside of the country of Nikan. And she is darker skinned, poor, a woman, so she has a lot of things going against her. She inevitably gets into one of the top military academies in the country. She goes, and, shit hit the fan. So that's really all I can say. I have a dedicated review of the first book. If you want to go check that out, I'll again link that up above. But this is the conclusion to the series, and wow. Oh my god, it was so good. 5 stars. It was just a good conclusion. It was such a good conclusion to the story. This was long. It's like over 600 pages, but it really flew by. I will say I was resisting so hard reading this book because I just didn't want it to end. I didn't want to know how it was going to end. I just knew I was going to be heartbroken at the end of this book. So I did read this over the course of like 4 days, which is not that long, but I would read chunks at a time and just like not touch it for the whole day or something like that. Because I was just like, I don't know. I don't know if I want to know. But now I know, I'm heartbroken. But I think this was really such a strong conclusion to the series. I don't really know what to say without giving spoilers. But actually, I'm gonna dive into some spoilers real quick. Not that much, but I'll have a little timestamp for you to skip to if you haven't read this series or The Burning God yet. So one thing I will say is that this series, especially this book, I feel like, has really made me like deeply think about colonization and war, what it means to different people. So Rin is obviously so headstrong and angry. She's filled with so much rage. So this is really what's driving her in this war against the Dragon Republic. And it's just really interesting because there will be moments in here where she's suddenly like faced with how this war is impacting the average Joe, just the normal people, peasants who don't really have a say in what's going on either way. And there was a part at the end where she thought people would be happy that she was back and won the war, but she still had to face the Hesperians. And they were like, bro, we're like fucking hungry. Like, we don't care. Like, we can't fight another war. Like, we don't care about you. Look at all of the devastation that you brought, regardless of the fact that, she liberated them from the colonizers. Like, it's very clear that Rin just is not taking into consideration the people when she is, fighting this fight. So I just thought that was really interesting. There was another part where she is in Arlong, the capital of like the Dragon Republic, and she's there to save Katai. Walking around, and they see how much the city has transformed after like occupation by the Hesperians, and how everything is clean, how everything seems to be more technologically advanced already just in the span of 6 months. And they're so awestruck, and she's having this conversation with Katai later, and he's like, what about if we are not as good as them? And it was so heartbreaking. And obviously that's not the case, but just like, what does this mean? Like innovation, like the colonization part sucks, right? Because they're coming in and they essentially want to completely destroy the Nakara culture and who these people are. And they have an idea of what good people are like and what the world should look like, But with that comes with so much technological advancement, which when I was reading that part, I was thinking about this show that I'm watching, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, called Startup on Netflix. And there's this character, Dosan. His father is protesting this other rival company, their technology, because it's going to be replacing the workers. And so he's protesting that, and he comes in and he just like is on this like demo day. This requires a lot of explanation for this to make sense, but the point that I'm trying to make is he has this conversation with that rival company and is like, hey, like obviously technology and innovation is good, but think about how that's leaving behind the rest of us who can't keep up. And I don't know. I don't really know the point that I'm trying to make, but I was just thinking a lot about this. This book just like had me like randomly staring off for like 20 minutes, just like thinking about all of this. There hasn't been like a book, like a series, a fiction series that's made me think so deeply about the themes in this book like this has. It just made me think about the power of fiction books, because I think we place so much emphasis and importance on nonfiction and facts, which obviously those are very important, but I think oftentimes when we're talking about these kind of themes, racism, colonialism, all of that, we don't credit enough the lived experiences of the people, of anecdotes, of stories of people. Like everything just has to be facts. But with fiction books, like we get to see the emotional side, the realistic, the personal side of these issues. And so, yeah, anyway, I'm just rambling now. So this was great. This was really good. If I had to nitpick, I will say that some of the pacing felt a little bit off. Obviously, R.F. Kuang had a lot to do in this book, had a lot to wrap up, and for the most part, I think she did it excellently. But it does feel a little bit rushed, especially the end, and then there's another part in the middle that I won't go into again because of spoilers that felt a little anticlimactic. But other than that, this was really good. I think I would love to do like either a series review or maybe like a deep dive video essay style, a video about the series in the future. Probably not for a while because I do want to reread it and go a little bit more deeply into the story, but it was so good. 5 stars, amazing. I also read The Drowning Faith, which was like the short little 15-page point of view from Neja that came with like the pre-order, but then yesterday RF Kuang like posted it on her Twitter, so I read it and it was good. It was heartbreaking, of course. What a fantastic series. Truly so good. So those were the books that I read for this month outside of the books that I read for Indigathon. And I just really want to quickly do a little like December TBR just because I don't have a lot of books planned. And so let's get into it. Hello. It is me a little bit later filming on my phone. I realized that I forgot to talk about all of the stuff that I watched and listened to this month. Like I mentioned earlier, I've been watching this Korean drama on Netflix called Startup that follows multiple people trying to get into the startup slash business industry. You know what? I'll just post a little description about what the show is about because it's kind of complicated. There's a lot of moving parts and I don't want to waste y'all's time because I know I won't be able to explain it well. But I've been watching that and I have been watching some holiday movies. I don't even celebrate Christmas, but something about the Hallmark slash Lifetime holiday Christmas romantic comedies really hit a certain spot for me. So I've watched a couple that were not great, like not good at all. And then I watched The Happiest Season on Hulu with Kristen Stewart. And you know, I have a lot of thoughts about this. It was by far not the worst holiday rom-com that I've seen. And I was really excited because it's a sapphic romance. But the way Harper and her family treated Abby, they should not have ended up together. They should not have ended up together. Abby and Riley. That's all I gotta say on that. I haven't been listening really to any podcasts this month, but as far as music goes, Ariana Grande's new album, Positions, not even an Ariana stan, but the album's a bop, I will say that. Megan Thee Stallion came out with a new album like a week ago. Also a bop. She really did that, you know what I'm saying? She really dragged she really dragged Tory Lanez, or whatever his name is. It's funny because I, for the life of me, could not remember what his name was because he's irrelevant, you know? Irrelevant. And yeah, that's all I got for y'all. Anyways, back to the rest of the video. First up, I have Pachinko by Minjin Lee. This is a literary historical fiction novel. It says teenage Sunja, the adored daughter of a crippled fisherman, falls for a wealthy stranger at the seashore. He promises her the world, but when she discovers she is pregnant and that her lover is married, she refuses to be bought. So she ends up accepting a marriage offer from a traveling sickly minister who's like passing through their boarding house on his way to Japan. And so this decision to abandon her family and her kid's father ends up setting a whole mess of course of situations that happen. And I think this follows multiple generations, if I'm not mistaken. But I've heard excellent things about this book. Obviously, it was a National Book Award finalist. But I'm reading this for my Pros Before Bros book club that I'm a part of. I'm super excited to be back. The last few months, I haven't been able to attend any of the meetings because they've been, unfortunately, at the same time that I've had my evening classes, which I'm so glad I'm done with that. And I don't have really any evening classes next semester, which, thank God, I don't like being done with class at 9:30 p.m., you know? Like, why? But I'm reading that for that, and I'm hoping to finish this before the our meeting on December 17th. So I started this already. It's really good so far, but yeah. Next, a book that I already put, I think, on like 2 different TBRs, or maybe just one previous one. But I have The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I'm reading this for my like small little book club that I have with 3 of my friends. It's really just like a buddy read, but this is what we chose to read for December. And I probably won't get to this until towards the end of December, but I feel like everyone knows what this book is about, and I've already talked about it. But it follows Addie LaRue, who makes a deal with the devil to live forever, but everyone's gonna forget her. So, and then one day she finds someone who actually remembers her, and so that sets off a whole situation. So, yeah. Then another book that I had on a previous TBR was Transcendent Kingdom by Ya Gyasi. I am determined to read this book before the end of the year. I am so hopeful. I'm going to make it happen. I need to read this before the end of the year. As I've mentioned many times, Homegoing was one of my favorite books that I read this year. So I need to read this. That is all I have. As I mentioned, really short TBR. I only have like 3 books that I'm really trying to prioritize, but yeah, you know, December's gonna be a very wild month for me with finals. That is it for this video. Comment down below, what is a book that you're most excited to read in December? Are there any books that you're trying to get in before the end of the year? Don't forget to like and subscribe, hit the notification bell. I don't know, I've never said that before, but I thought I'd throw it in here. But I will catch y'all in the next video. Also, don't forget to follow me on Instagram and Twitter.